Welcome to Election 2017. I'm Teresa Whipple, your host, and we're here with Port Commission candidate Susan Paine from District 5. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, and let's start by having you talk a little bit about your background, and you've been in Edmonds a long time, I know.
I have. I've lived in Edmonds for the last 15 years. I moved here from Seattle, and my daughters attended the Edmonds schools. And so one of the things that I did when I first got here is I ran for a school board position, and I was elected, and I was on the board for 6 years. One of the other things that I've done locally is I was on the tree board with the city of Edmonds.
Right. Yeah, your name does sound familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about why you're running for Port Commission.
Well, I'm running for Port Commissioner for a couple of important reasons. A couple of years ago, the Port of Edmonds put a big spotlight on redevelopment, and that was a development adjacent to the marshes, the Harbor Square master plan that they wanted to put forward. And that put a real, it put a spotlight on what the port's activities were and what they were hoping to do. And there was a pretty big reaction to it, and that in part was with the Save Our Marsh folks, and people wanted to say, wait a minute, this marsh is really important to us, and it's one of the values that I hold. So I ended up looking at this a lot more closely when the position became open.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons why I'm running, is that if the marsh did get highlighted, and activities around the marsh needed, were spotlighted with that, and it's been very, very interesting to have this whole campaign get started.
Okay, good. And, speaking of the marsh, of course, one of the reasons why that came to the forefront is it was before the city council, and there was a lot of discussion about kind of the role of the port in development of Harbor Square, the city's response to that. The citizens were, as you said, a lot of them coming to council meetings and testifying about their worries about, what might happen.
Right.
What do you see as a port commissioner as your role in interacting with the city of Edmonds and in city politics? It seems like it's kind of a delicate balance.
It is. There's certainly responsibilities that the commissioners all are responsible to go ahead and carry out, and a lot of it includes activities around the marina and any sort of property development and property management, which is what the Port of Edmonds does do, and they do it very well. For the areas where there's a lot of intersection for the city of Edmonds and also the Port of Edmonds is stormwater management, and then also ways to make sure that when there's development or redevelopment that's proposed, that it's done in a coordinated manner that follows the land use rules, and that there's ways to go ahead and talk about this in a respectful manner, and that we can find a good solution. And that is my goal. I think that there's a lot of opportunity that's right there to go ahead and put those plans together.
And you mentioned land use, and I remember I heard you speak at a candidate forum a couple of weeks ago, and you mentioned that your background is actually in land use. You worked for the city of Seattle doing that, right?
I did. I worked with the city of Seattle, or for the city of Seattle, for years and years, and I've recently retired from there. And a lot of my work included doing regulatory work around land use and how it intersected with development, and how it intersected with making sure that the environmental controls were in place to make sure that there wasn't harm done during the development, and that when the development was in place, that a lot of the opportunities that the city of Seattle provided was to make sure that there's a lot of green development, that it wasn't going to negatively impact the environment in ways that couldn't be mitigated.
Mm-hmm. I probably should have asked you this question at the beginning, because I think it's a question that a lot of voters have, is what is a port district? How do you define it?
The Port District, it has its boundaries, and it's a taxing district. It's a separate district. I've heard it described as similar to a fire district, but the fire district has its own set of responsibilities. The Port District has responsibilities for maintaining the marina and having some other economic development activities, including now the recent ad was tourism, which is fantastic. It's also similar to a school district. A school district is where you have your board of directors or your board of commissioners, and they work together with the executive director to make sure that that all the operations are smoothly functioning, either the business operations or the sort of maintenance operations, to make sure that everything's working smoothly.
Right.
And it's more of a collaborative sort of situation, and not not at all like what you normally see in a city council, where you have your own sets of responsibilities, and you're moving those things forward with their committee assignments.
Right. And so you basically have some public tax dollars you're responsible for in
Right.
terms of making sure that that money is spent wisely and on things that are within the purview of the port, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And and
Okay.
that's how that gets put together.
Okay. So if, obviously there's some legal requirements the port has to be mindful of when they're doing their work, and you're an elected official representing constituents. How do you kind of balance those two out?
It means, what it really means is that you explain what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and make sure that you have that information available to all of the residents. It's the voting population, but it's also our residents. It's also the people who use our marina. The boaters and the fishermen and all those people who are active participants. Inside the port. You need to make sure that you have that dialogue always going on. Transparency is important.
Yeah.
These are all public funds, and so we need to make sure that people have the opportunity to make sure that they understand what's going on, and you budget and you put your money forward by putting out where the values are for the community and where you want to have things facing. If you're looking towards a future that includes a lot of restoration or at least reducing harm to the marsh, then you're going to have a budget that emphasizes those priorities.
Right. And do you think, kind of some of the topics that came up when the marsh issue surfaced seemed to be kind of that push-pull between development versus environment, and do you think the two can coexist?
It depends on the development. I mean, it really does. I mean, we have a lot of big challenges that are coming up in our in our local environment. The weather's been rather amazing. I mean, it really has been, and I believe that it's climate change, and we're going to have sea level rise that's coming up. We don't have a strategy with the Port of Edmonds quite yet, and it has to be done in concert with the City of Edmonds as well. There's a plan that needs to be put into place to go ahead and mitigate climate change impacts, and that's going to include the marsh. The development aspect, I think that the Port of Edmonds has done a really fine job in financially managing their Harbor Square properties, and that they are doing very well financially, and they are almost 100% full. By the last set of numbers, they're at 96 or 98%, at capacity, and that means I think that there's just a few square feet of available space and not much more. They're doing just fine there. Some of the properties, the funds from properties help to support the marina, which is great. So they have a really nice financial plan put in place, which I think is wonderful.
Okay. And the Harbor Square, of course, when the marsh issue and some of the development questions came into play, one of the things that I think a lot of us were made aware of is the fact that those Harbor Square business complex buildings are pretty old.
Right.
And nobody's quite sure, how long they'll last, and there's a lot of, seems like Band-Aids kind of being put here and there.
Right.
What do you think is possible there? Because I know there is concern about what development there could do to the marsh and all
Right.
of that, but do you have a vision for what it might look like in 5 or 10 years?
In 5 or 10 years, I think that it would be very difficult to evaluate that right now without having some better science about what we can anticipate with sea level rise. Sea level rise in the next 5 years to 10 years could easily be half a foot to maybe 9 inches, and so you can actually see the sea level rise happening around here. And so we'll have to evaluate that as well. For adding new development, I'm not a big proponent of that. Not until I number one, see a need, and then if there's development that looks like we've got a great potential, then let's make sure that it is code compliant, that it can work well in the situation that's right there. I'm totally supportive of that. I think that some of the strengths that I would bring in this as a candidate in this race is that I have done a lot of the development with the school district, with building out a couple of the high school and the middle school. When we went through the downturn, we did that. And those were done in an environmentally responsible way that included green features that would go ahead and mitigate some of the harm that happens when you put in a new development. But those were all code compliant, and they were also compliant with the sort of strategies that are allowed to have port authorities go ahead and do that.
Okay, so if somebody came to you and said, as I've heard people say this over the years, when the port first had a proposal for Harbor Square,
Right.
and there was talk about having some residences there that would getting some younger people who maybe want to live in those places and have them get to catch the Sounder train to downtown Seattle, and how convenient would that be? And that's something that may have some possibility for you if it was done right.
Not residential.
Okay, so
Not-
you don't think residential down
Well,
there
and
makes
it's not
sense.
within the port's ability to go ahead and
Right.
put that
No, I know
forward.
currently it's not,
Right.
but it's not something that you think is workable down there.
I think by state law it's not.
Okay.
I mean, I'd have to, that's what I've heard from a friend of mine who works for the Port of
Right.
Seattle. And that, and I've been plucking around. I haven't found it exactly. But number one, I think that I don't know that it needs to be there.
Okay.
And there's a lot of other activities that could go ahead and be less disruptive for the marsh that could be put in place there. So if there was a development proposal that was for a science, meeting place, so you could have a meeting hall, and that was more like, say, some of the parks in Seattle have the Environmental Learning Center at Carkeek Park, something like that, where you had a conference hall that you could go ahead and bring in people for, for lectures, et cetera. That would be an ideal sort of setup. I would love to see something like that where you can, spotlight. I think an economic sort of opportunity would be to go ahead and have environmental tourism and have it there at the marsh and highlight some activities about marsh restoration there at the marsh. I think that would be terrific.
Okay, all right. What new or additional efforts do you think could be used to clean up the Unocal site in the Edmonds Marsh? That's something I know that has been of concern to folks.
It's from all of the reading I've been doing about what the opportunities are there, I think they're pretty prescribed right now. They're pretty locked down. The Chevron, who's put together the program to go ahead and do this, has gone through a lot of the EPA hoops, and it's pretty much locked down. It would be terrific to work with them to find opportunities where we can build some opportunities together and have that work for the marsh. I don't know what those are, but I know that if there are opportunities, I would be really excited by that. I think some of the opportunities that are out there to maybe reach a higher and better level of cleanup would be the exact right thing to do. And because it would be so fantastic to daylight Willow Creek and to add other sort of environmental services to that whole area, then we'd be able to go ahead and have a much larger marsh, because I do anticipate that it will flood in the next 20 years. I'm certain that we'll be seeing floods through there because of sea level rise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the mapping on NOAA and everybody else, it will be there, which is a little scary and something you have to really plan about.
Right. What would you say, what kind of approach would you take in terms of developing good working relationships between the port, the city of Edmonds, the town of Woodway? I mean, those entities are all kind of sharing a lot of the same needs and resources, and how
Sure.
would you approach that?
I would make sure that we would, I'd love to see a problem-solving sort of setup where we can go ahead and say, we've got to talk about stormwater. Stormwater is a city issue. The port, is the recipient of a lot of stormwater that comes down the main streets, like Main Street, Dayton, and Highway 104, and that's a WashDOT, sort of property. And make sure that we have all of our interests lined up and find ways to go ahead and address these. I think it's to the economic benefit of the city of Edmonds, for the port of Edmonds, to work well together, and with also the property owners I bet that everybody would love to see cleaner water coming into the marsh as as it kind of floats through the systems. Find ways to make sure that that happens in a real collaborative way. I'm sure that we could have some wins there. It means probably some engineering solutions and probably some environmental solutions as well. But I think that that's totally a resolvable thing.
Let's talk a little bit about what I've seen over time is some tension between the Port of Edmonds and the city of Edmonds seemed to arise specifically when we were talking about Harbor Square.
Right.
Why do you think that is, and what can be done to change it?
Well, why I think that is, I think that the port didn't propose in their master plan, their Harbor Square master plan, something that was code compliant, and they really wanted to see something like that go through. I know that with City Council, there's often these 3-4 votes where it's very divided and it's pretty distinct. That I think has been a huge part of why there's been some tension, and it is visible. I think what we need to do is, number one, I think we need to revise the Harbor Square master plan and get that updated. I think that needs to be done by the port so that they can go ahead and have something. And then when they look at that again, make sure that it is code compliant for the land use code.
Okay.
And I think that there are other opportunities that they can go ahead and have more conversations and opportunities to find collaborative, sort of prospects that they can go ahead and start building on and building the trust and those relationships in a better way.
Okay. One other question I wanted to follow up on that you talked about earlier, you mentioned transparency. I've been to a handful of port meetings, and it seems like they're not very well attended. They're not videotaped. I don't know that people really are even aware they're happening, or do you think there's a better way to be able to get people engaged in what's going on with the Port Commission?
I think that what they should do is maybe, I know that they publish their minutes. They should spend a little bit more time, and I know that they're doing this on social media, where they will go ahead and get maybe some other sets of voter, demographics, and then I think that people should see what's going on there as a part of their citizens' responsibility. I mean, there needs to be better outreach. They should go ahead and I think Bob McChesney does a fantastic job doing these updates, and he does them in My Edmonds News and with the Beacon and some of the other local papers.
Yeah.
It means always having that dialogue and having that conversation. It also means having the port commissioners out and about and in the community and talking about the issues when things bubble up, and out there just talking about what's going on with the port, and in terms of the marina activities, Harbor Square activities, if there's anything that's new that's coming up that people are going to want to know about. Give people a little bit more runway so nothing becomes a surprise.
Okay, good suggestions. Well, now I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak directly to the voters and
Okay.
tell them why they should elect you. So have at it.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I do appreciate the time. My name is Susan Paine, and I am running for Port of Edmonds Commissioner position number 5. I would really appreciate your vote. What I would bring to the Port Commission is experience in working as an elected with the school board, and also in working with regulatory environments that include land use and other aspects that include the environmental impacts when you do any development. I'm also an avid, fisherman, as a fisher person, and I've always loved being out in the natural environment. I think that the ability to go ahead and support our Edmonds Marsh and all of the environmental benefits that it brings to all of Edmonds and the region. This coming weekend we have Birdfest coming up, that we have some opportunities there that we can go ahead and really highlight and showcase the city of Edmonds and our local area and our businesses in ways that we haven't really had the opportunity to do before. It really is an untapped sort of resource for the entire city, and I'd love to be able to work on that as a port commissioner. So I would appreciate your vote on November 7th.
Susan Paine, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very
Best
much
of
for
luck.
having me. Thank you.